Welcome back to Morgan on Purpose, the podcast. And I think we can officially say now 'tis the season. People are thinking proactively about giving back, giving to charity and helping others, right, during this holiday season. Now, of course, in an ideal world, we want to be thinking about these things all the time, right, all year round. And we'll get into that during the podcast today. But since we have everyone's attention with the holidays and the end of the year, it feels like a great time to jump in. So for that to that end, I'm joined by Mariah Brook, Director of Gift Planning at the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation, to talk a bit about how to plan the best ways to give back. Uh, Welcome, Mariah. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Morgan.
Yeah, I'm excited. So before we get too far into the details, for any listeners who don't know, what does it mean to be a director of philanthropic gift planning?
Yeah. Well, I've joked for a long time that I wish my title was party planning as opposed to gift planning. But I will take gift planning. It's a great profession and it's been a great blessing to be in this role. But really what it means to be a director of gift planning is I have the privilege and opportunity of working with individuals who are trying to be really thoughtful about their philanthropic planning. And that could be charitable gifts that they want to make during their lifetime. It could be thinking about gifts they want to make after their lifetime or a combination of the two. And I have the opportunity to really sit at this kind of beautiful precipice of both having the fun conversation around what types of organizations do people like to give to? What are the family stories that have led you to care about those types of organizations? What are your family values, the things you really care about? But then also the tax planning and the estate planning and some of the more complex aspects of making charitable gifts. And while I'm not an attorney and not a financial advisor, I love getting to be at the table to work with those advisors and make sure that we are really all coming up with a plan that works from all of those different aspects.
Yeah, fantastic. And we won't get too far into the tax or legal or financial stuff. That's for the professionals to handle. Um, but I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about what the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation does and what its role is in the broader giving ecosystem, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. So the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation is a community foundation. When I say that, most people don't know what a community foundation is. So really a community foundation at its heart is an organization, it's a nonprofit that collects and stewards dollars that are meant to benefit the broader community. So it does kind of sound like what the name says. And each community foundation is very different. There are hundreds across the country, and in Minnesota, we are blessed to have many here as well. Most, if not all, community foundations are geographically based. And so we have the privilege at the St. Paul in Minnesota to not only represent St. Paul and the East Metro, but also the whole state. And that is because at one point we were two separate legal entities. I won't go into kind of that story, but in 2020, we legally merged after working together for decades and decades. And so now we are one organization that really cares about supporting the entire state of Minnesota. And when I think about our role in the broader giving ecosystem, especially in our state, we are the state's largest community foundation. And when I say that, I mean not only by the numbers in our assets under management, which that is true, but I also think really our impact. So for example, in 2024, we made charitable grants to 72 of the 87 counties in Minnesota. And I don't know that there are any other foundations in the state that can say that they had that kind of reach in our vast state of Minnesota into different types of organizations and supporting really as many Minnesotans as we can. So I think that's a big part of the role. And then the different types of things that we do a lot of different things. So many nonprofits know about us for our application-based grant making work. That's something that we do largely in the East Metro, but also statewide. We work with individuals who have donor advised funds and help support their family philanthropy through those vehicles. We work with nonprofits across the state as well to manage their endowment funds and help them think through their long-term giving strategies. And we support both individuals and nonprofits in helping turn unique charitable gifts like farm equipment and grain and gifts of gold coins into charitable impact. So we do a lot of work in the non-cash asset space as well.
It sounds like Minnesota, right? We have farm equipment, we have grain. Look at all these. I know for a fact, like other farm stuff, land, all that fun stuff can be donated. And I don't have the stat in front of me. You might, but I'm pretty sure Minnesota, as you and I know as Minnesotans, ranks pretty highly in terms of giving per capita. I don't know how you rank that. Do you have any
Yeah.
data on that or anything like that?
I don't have an exact number on that, but certainly anecdotally, when we meet with our community foundation peers across the country, consistently there is just a sense of giving and philanthropy that is embedded in the heartbeat of Minnesota that I can't say is necessarily true everywhere. And so we are incredibly fortunate to have folks who are community minded and want to be giving, and that goes from grassroots individuals who are giving to smaller organizations and it's $5 contributions up to some of our, very wealthy families that everyone kind of knows their name, and then into our corporations as well. And so we really, I think philanthropy is a part of Minnesota's heartbeat.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So what's the biggest question you get from would-be donors?
That's a great question. I think right now, and this has always been true, but I think it's certainly true right now. Donors are curious about how to evaluate whether an organization is doing really great work with their charitable contributions, and is that something that we can help them think through? And that's a question that we love to get because we love to provide information and insight that some folks just don't know. And we have a lot of information around this. We also get the opportunity to talk about the importance of overhead, for example. So that often plays into how donors are thinking about who they should be giving to. And there's this myth that overhead is bad. And we get to kind of have a conversation and say, but if we have strong overhead for an organization, you get to hire and retain really great staff. The programs that you're running are better supported. And it really is an important part of the ecosystem of a nonprofit. So we love getting those types of questions. I think in light of some of the feeding our future things that are going on right now, there's just more scrutiny around nonprofits and how they're spending their money. And we want to shed light on the fact that most organizations are doing a fantastic job stewarding their dollars. And we want to celebrate that. And we want to continue to give unrestricted grants to organizations, unrestricted gifts, so that they can really go out and do the important work that they are tasked at doing.
Yeah, I think that overhead comment is so important. And I got some insight. My wife has spent most of her career as a nonprofit executive. So I've heard her on the kind of the other side of this giving equation saying, like a general ops gift can be so powerful to certain nonprofits. And also, as you point out, from a overhead point of view or overhead margin, let's say, some models are direct service, right? They're human dependent because you need to hire humans who receive salary and compensation and benefits to go out and enact the mission of the nonprofit on behalf of the donors. So yeah, that's super well received. What should people be looking for in organizations? I know there's charity ranking sites, stuff like that, but what's your best advice to help people feel confident about the organizations they're donating to?
Yeah, great question. So there certainly are ranking sites. Some of them are more helpful than others. What I'll say, there are certain ranking sites where you can get a higher ranking if you have the staff, time, and capacity to submit all of the documents and information that they're looking for. So just because an organization doesn't show up as a gold or a platinum organization, that doesn't say anything about the quality of the work that they're doing. Frankly, it says a lot about the staff capacity that they have to submit those documents and continue to submit them to keep that status. And so there's certainly a role for that. I understand why organizations do it if they have the ability, but that doesn't actually help us understand how successful an organization is. We're always an advocate of encouraging folks to connect directly with the organizations that they're interested in supporting to learn more. And that could look like attending an event. It could look like visiting their website and really getting a good understanding of what they're talking about. If it's an organization that produces an annual report, really reading through that. Most annual reports talk about finances and how the organization did in the previous year. So there are great ways to get information. Sometimes individuals are interested in doing a site visit and meeting with somebody from staff. And I think a lot of times that can be really beneficial. My only word of caution is that nonprofit staff are really inundated right now with a lot of work and their time is limited. And so we just want to be mindful of how and when we're asking for those types of meetings. Again, I do think they can play a really important role for an organization to come and meet with a leader, whether it's someone who oversees a certain programmatic area, maybe the executive director. But we just need to be mindful of their time and be respectful of what they're able to give.
Yeah, I think there's like donor vetting, right? Like a kind of sort of a responsibility on the donor's shoulders, because they want to maximize the impact. And then also it's like, but we don't want that to, my words, Mariah, not yours, shift into entitlement,
Mm.
right? That you're entitled to the staff's time or whatnot. Obviously, they're going to support you in getting the answers you need, and that's also why you might work through a philanthropic consultant that kind of like does this work, um, not necessarily for you, but with you, right? In consultation with you. So if we segue a little bit, so what's the best thing that families can do to prepare uh, for giving or to live a philanthropic life?
Yeah, I think especially at this time of year, this is a really poignant question to ask. I think in many ways it's just talking about it. It's having a conversation around the dinner table or maybe after a meal, and talking about what are the things you care about? Where are you doing your charitable giving? If there are individuals who have recently updated their estate plan and there's a philanthropic component, it's actually sharing that with your heirs so that they aren't surprised when that estate plan comes into fruition and parents decided a certain percentage was going towards philanthropic efforts. We've seen that happen, and it going through the kind of estate process is not fun for anybody, and so we want to make it as smooth as possible. And having these conversations ahead of time, I think, is one of the ways to get at that, to just make that process go really well, estate administration go really well. I think I have two little children, and we're always thinking about how do we just in our conversations talk about the things that we care about as a family. And as they get a little bit older, it turns into how do we show them? How do we involve them in bundling diapers for the local food shelf that also gives away diapers to folks who come in, going to Feed My Starving Children and helping them pack food and helping them understand kind of the ecosystem of food in the world, that not everybody has access to all of the food that we have. So I think those are just a couple of things. So thinking about the family conversations, but then also volunteerism and how you can really live that way and demonstrate your values through your actions.
I mean, let's make estate conversations fun, right?
Yes.
I think the giving angle, the philanthropic angle, uh, is, in my experience, the most joyful aspect of that whole framework. Whether it is a retired couple mapping it all out, or a business owner kind of thinking through an exit, or just any normal family, right? I don't think it needs to be giving at scale. Like as you mentioned, it can be $10 here, $20 here, and I think that is a lot of the giving um, across the country. And then I think it also, like as you said, like it starts young, right? It's kind of up to parents to create a culture of giving. One of my favorite stories was I had a client that every holiday season, every Christmas season, uh, they had 5 children, and each kid got to say, let's do $100 here or $500 here. So everybody got a vote, and then they send out different checks that each kid got some ownership of. Obviously, it's family money, but each kid got to kind of direct that giving, and I love that because I think it created, as you were talking about with your kids, just created a culture of giving. And then also noting the impact and why do we care for that organization? Why do they need the money? It creates these conversations and kind of goes to a service mentality. I suppose.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think you're spot on that, the number of times I have sat in a room with a couple and asked some of those questions around giving, tell me, what are your first memories of giving? You care about this organization. What family values map to that? Or do you have any family stories from your upbringing that tie directly to that? And the number of times that folks have truly ended up in tears because we don't often get to reflect on those stories. They aren't something that often comes to mind for us. And so I feel privileged that I get to bear witness to that conversation and be a part of that, but how much more impactful if their children get to hear that, if their grandchildren get to hear that story of, I think of in particular one gentleman who really had a legacy career at 3M. And that was all because he had received a scholarship to go to college and ended up getting his PhD. And now he and his wife have created this really impactful scholarship program through their philanthropy. And every time we talk about, and it just brings him to tears to reflect back on the power of that scholarship and what it did for him. And again, what an opportunity to share that with those that you love.
Yeah, yeah, that's a lovely story. And obviously, my platform is all about tying values and purpose
Mhm.
to our financial decisions, and I think we kind of get lost in the dollars and cents, in the spreadsheeting, or overwhelmed by that, or we think that that's all we're supposed to do with money. But when we tie it to the values, when we tie it to a sense of purpose, uh, everything just works better, right? And it's so much more meaningful, so much more joyful. So I love that you bring that up, Mariah. Um, what do people get wrong about charitable giving?
That's a great question. A couple things that come to mind. So, one is oftentimes when I'm working with a family, a new family, and they're opening up a donor advised fund, typically, they'll show me a list of the organizations that they've given to. And we might walk through, and I'll kind of ask some of those questions I said earlier. Tell me a little bit about this, tell me about that. And sometimes many of the organizations are, well, a friend asks me to give here, or this, I've just been giving, I haven't really thought much about the organization. And you mentioned this earlier, and a former pastor from my church used to say it, that I really, I think giving is designed so that the giver is the one who receives the joy. And so if we allow donors to keep giving to places that they don't feel joyful about giving, I think that's a missed opportunity. But people often feel like, well, I need to keep giving here, or I should, or it's just habit. And so I love to help flip that a little bit and help people think through what types of gifts, what types of organizations would help you feel really joyful about your charitable giving. So I think that's one area. And the other that I think maybe external folks, not the donors themselves, but external folks, it could be people in fundraising or working at nonprofits. I think there's a higher emphasis on the tax benefits of giving than maybe are real. So, one of my favorite teachers in this space talks about how taxes might motivate the timing of somebody's gift, but they rarely impact the why. So people are typically charitably inclined or not. And there may be a year where they're selling a business. And so, yes, that year they do have a big taxable event. They want to make a bigger charitable gift in that year for tax purposes. That makes sense. But the why behind their giving was already there, and they're just timing it in a certain way. So, even some of the new tax laws that went into effect this year, I'll be really curious what the actual impact of that is, because I think people will continue to give either way. And we know there are benefits, there are tax benefits, and we want to keep those tax benefits in place for charitable gifts. But I really think that the taxes just motivate the timing of the gift, and aren't the actual motivation for somebody making a gift.
Yeah, yeah, that's fantastic. Um, what are the nonprofits themselves asking for? What kind of feedback are you getting from the recipients of philanthropy?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question and thinking that way. I know that comes from much of your wife's impact, I'm sure, on your career and how
She's
you think
drilled
about.
that in my head, Mariah.
Yes.
She's drilled that in my head.
Yes, no, that's fantastic. You spoke on it earlier, general operating support. That is, I think, the single biggest gift that we can give to our nonprofit partners, to say, here is what I can give, and I trust you to make the best use and decisions around how to use those dollars. Certainly after the pandemic, we saw foundations especially switch to doing more general operating grants. That was true at the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation, and we continue now to do primarily general operating grants. But what I heard actually just the other week is that many foundations are reverting back and are wanting to do more programmatic grants. And for some organizations, that aligns well and that works out fine for how they're structured. But for others, like you said earlier, they really just need the ability to pay staff to get out and do the people facing work, to work with their clients, to support, whatever mission they're doing. And so general operating, I think, is the biggest ask from our nonprofit partners. I think more organizations are also asking for their donors, for the people involved, to engage politically on their behalf. And that could be as simple as sending an email to your representative talking about a specific issue, making sure they know that they care. And I actually had an opportunity last week to meet with one of the staff members of one of my representatives. And it was really helpful to just get to share with her, hey, I love living in your district. Here's a couple things that I really care about that I see really aligned with what you're doing. And here's a couple areas that I'd love to see growth or maybe more opportunities that you're leaning into. And so I think we are hearing more organizations ask for their individuals, the people who care about the organization, to be politically involved.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've gotten obsessed in our culture with just ideas that scale, right? So it's like we're obsessed with companies that scale or software that scales. And I think we're looking for panaceas, right? If I give here, I'm going to have the highest impact and that's going to scale and help millions of people or whatever. And I think what uh, I've observed, and I kind of hear you saying this, is that so much giving doesn't actually scale, right? Like so much of the work that these incredible nonprofits do, it's not a scalable solution. If you think of a homeless shelter, that's not scalable. You need people to serve other people, right? These deserving humans, right? Who just need some support. Um, and I think that's where you kind of talked about the data. And if we're just looking at efficiency, right, or overhead numbers, we lose so much of the story. A food shelf doesn't scale. A women's shelter doesn't scale. Um, a place just to kind of lay your head at night, that doesn't scale. And that's like, we need that. We desperately need that in so many cities in Minnesota and across the country. Um, Mariah, you mentioned how kind of like the calendar can uh, direct planning or charitable giving. Um, but that's not, why we give, right? We don't give for taxes. We want to be tax savvy. Um, but obviously there's life events or, end of year considerations that kind of like pull our giving forward, let's say. Are there any holiday or year end specific considerations you point out?
Yeah, well, so if we're talking from a tax standpoint, that 12/31 deadline is the last day to make any charitable gifts that count towards your 2025 overall tax picture. So definitely think that through. And there are some different considerations for your timing based on what type of gift you're giving. So if you're giving a gift of a check, it just needs to be post dated by 12/31. There are some organizations that intentionally have staff at their office, so you could drop it off that day potentially. Stock gifts, we're getting to the point where those could be a little bit more tricky to make sure they get in time. Obviously, we want them initiated, but those can take a little bit more time. But I like to think too of the fun things. So today is the first day as we're recording of Hanukkah, which the Jewish tradition has a lot of beautiful giving traditions as a part of that. Christmas is coming up. So I think as we think about year end, there are a lot of great ways to not only think about the 12/31 tax deadline, but also just think about the holidays as a great way to talk about giving, think about giving, and consider those outside of ourselves and outside of our family units.
Yeah, that's lovely. And if you're kind of giving isn't dictated by the calendar, remember that organizations, nonprofits, they need money on 1/1 of the following year or the second week in January. They need money then too. So um, just because you don't get it in by the deadline, or if you're not dictated by the deadline, January, February, these can be great months to give, just because organizations really need it. Because obviously, money comes in during the fall, right? As people do their end of year planning. Um, when I think of money, I'm gonna get a little woo. on you, Mariah. When I think of money as energy, right? And one of my favorite quotes is John Kabat-Zinn, and it's there is no giver, there is no gift, there is no recipient. There's just the universe rearranging itself. And I've always just sat with that one. It always just puts me in my seat. And when I give, when I've seen my clients and loved ones give, it's the most incredible transfer and like receiving back of energy. I would say it's more impactful than like a conscious spending decision or investment decision. The giving is it, whether it's a family member in need, nonprofit. So I was really excited about this conversation. Thank you for coming on, Mariah. This was so wonderful. And that's a wrap on this month's episode. So thank you for being here, Mariah. And for the rest of you, be sure to subscribe to make sure you don't miss anything. And you can check out the episode description to find more out about Mariah, including links to the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation. Thank you, Mariah.
Thanks so much, Morgan.